Okay, we'll
the
call the
year,
meeting to order.
and I said,
This is the meeting of the
because of the
directors
way
of
they
the New
split
York
up the class,
Convention
you didn't
Center
know.
Development Corporation for Wednesday, March 13th, 2019. I'd like to note for the record that this meeting is being webcast. The directors have received the relevant written materials in advance of today's meeting and are free to ask any questions at any time. Please note that we welcome public comment on the items on the following agenda to ensure maximum opportunity for participation. Speakers representing themselves may speak for up to 2 minutes each, and those representing groups may speak for up to 4 minutes with one speaker per group. Speakers' comments may address only the items considered at today's meeting. Before we begin the substantive portion of the meeting, I would like to ask the directors whether anyone has any potential conflict of interest with respect to any of the items on today's agenda. If so, please an appropriate disclosure on the record at this time, so that we will then be sure that you may recuse yourself from any discussion with regard to such item. Hearing none, we will assume there are none, and we will move on. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes of the directors' meeting November 14, 2018. Could we have a motion unless there are any correction, addition, or deletion? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you. The motion carries. Robin Stout, President of the Corporation, will now present a request for authorization to adopt the Corporation's annual operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. And Robin, if you could also explain why we need this meeting.
Yes, that would be helpful. And why we are in this small room. Both things, yes. Let me start with the apologies first. Pursuant to state law, each ESD and each of its subsidiaries is required to adopt an annual budget prior to the end of the fiscal year on March 31. As you know, Alan Steele and I have been working very hard to try to coordinate OC, Operating Corporation meetings, the DC Development Corporation Director meetings, and we had a meeting scheduled for March 27, I think, 27 or 28, which would have been in time for us to do a budget prior to the end of the fiscal year on March 31. Because of various calendars with some of you and some of the other OC directors, that OC meeting had to be adjourned to April 2, which is beyond the legal deadline. Hence, we needed a meeting to approve this budget. And I apologize that we were not able to coordinate it. We will anticipate maybe the OC and the DC meetings to the extent possible. It just wasn't possible for this month. Number two, why we're in this small room, we had booked the larger conference room upstairs, but got bumped by the chief staff and a much larger meeting. So it's a little cramped and crowded, but I appreciate everybody coming in. So my apologies for that as well. But let's get down to business. The 2019-2020 budget. This item seeks the adoption of the CCDC budgets for both operating and capital expenditures for the next fiscal year, 2019 to 2020. Both budgets, as you'll see, are very little change from last year. On the operating side, the largest change is that the proposed salaries are slightly reduced, not because I'm taking a pay, but because CCDC hired a senior project manager who you met, I believe, at last, Sam Adolph, in place of what we had budgeted as a vice president position. And the remainder of the operating budget really just represents customary CCDC expenses from year to year. On the capital side, again, largely unchanged from last year, reflecting the fact that construction was in full swing and will largely remain in swing for this coming fiscal year as well. The $430 million construction cost figure obviously represents the expected expenditures for both the transformer building and the expansion itself, based on schedules and budgets which we have been provided by the developers, and of course reviewed then by CCDC and the project management team. Costs are down just slightly because, remember, as I'll discuss more in the meeting, we should be nearing the end of the transformer building by approximately this time next year. So we've spent the bulk of the money for the transformer building. It's probably 75% complete. I'll explain, we have a number of things to complete over the next year, but that's a reason for a slight reduction in the overall construction budget. And the other costs structured are that to the overall construction expenditure, including fees for CCDC's project manager, the integrity monitor, council, etc. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but otherwise the directors are being asked to approve both the CCDC operating and the capital budgets for the coming fiscal year. Of course, the funds are listed on the front page of the materials.
Any questions or comments?
I would say I don't have a question directly about the budget, but I do have two process questions to raise them. I think the budget, by the way, looks fine and I support it. But,
thank you.
The two questions I have are this. I'd like to make the same comment I made at the last meeting, which is I believe we should have a number in this report that shows the achieved numbers. Because as I understand it, what you're showing here is the approved budget for last year for the 18.
Oh, yes, yes. I'm
But,
sorry. Yes,
but I had asked if we could have a report on the achieved numbers
Yes,
for the year. And I think that it would
We
be
can have it
helpful.
for the next meeting, sure.
I'm sorry?
Have that for the next meeting.
The
I had asked for it at the
actual
last meeting,
expenditures,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I
Actual.
appreciate it if that could be provided.
But David, just to understand, you're looking for on a year-to-year basis.
Year-to-year basis. I'm just
Yes,
trying to, we're being asked to approve a budget for 2019, 2020, and we are shown the budget that we adopted for 18 and 19.
Yes,
And
right.
at the last meeting, I asked whether we could see what the results were.
You did. Let me say, well, first of all, yes. The answer to your question is
Thank
yes.
you.
We should have had it together for this meeting. That's my error.
And we do it.
Second, when we pull that together, what you will see is that we obviously project these budgets somewhat conservatively, so we don't have to come back to you. We were under budgets both on the operating and on the capital side, not by a lot. So we were basically were conservative, but on target for what we expected to spend. I don't have in my mind a year-to-year, David, but again, on the transformer building, as I say, we're probably 70-75% complete, and we've spent somewhere over $70 million total now of what is currently a $96 million budget. And on the LLT expansion, remember that's the $1.2 billion base price, and we've crossed the $400 million threshold on payments for that pursuant to the contract that we have. And obviously, all of that money is not paid out until there's a very detailed review of the requisitions that come in, which include walking the site and seeing physically what we are paying for.
And so that leads me to my second question. And by the way, I appreciate that. And if you could, I think it would be helpful if you could circulate it just so that we have it more or less contemporaneous
Yes.
with the adoption.
Help me
of the budget.
remember that, please.
My second question is also a process question, which is that in connection with the March 31 deadline, which I have to say I appreciate you doing that. Having run these agencies myself, I struggle with that question. And it's always difficult. And so, appreciate you getting it done for the year. Usually, in other agencies that I've been familiar with, there is a component of this process in which some outside accountant, and I see that we're paying 50, I can't remember how we pay our outside accountant. Outside, you take the process, let's say. And I wonder, we don't seem to have that in CCDC, and I wonder whether that's because of just historical reasons or we've determined it isn't necessary. But it would seem to me that there should be a moment in which we meet with whoever the accountants are for this operation, and they tell us, well, there's problems or there's not problems, or you ought to have more oversight. Or
Yeah, no, I understood. I'm
And
defer to
you are
Captain.
right. You're right, David. We are annually audited by an outside auditing firm on a regular basis, as you can imagine. The reason that it is not specifically brought to this board is that all subsidiaries roll up into the parent ESD corporation. So when we review and look at the financial statements with the ESD board and audit and budget committee, we in essence have had sign off on all the numbers in there. We do, however, prepare a financial statement that is for CCDC as a subset of what the overall combined financial statements are. So we can always share that going forward with this board.
Yes.
I would say this, and Henry and Mr. Chairman, it's interesting to me, and I wasn't aware of that. And I don't really know if I like it. I mean, I understand that that's a process, but I'm not really sure if that is correct for us as a board, and that is, because I understand from Kathleen, if I understand what you're saying, is that there is some type of an accounting process, but it gets reported to our, whatever you would call the ESTC, and our parent board, but that at the operating level, where presumably we have some responsibility for this oversight, we don't actually get that report directly from the accountants. And I find that a little unusual, and I wonder whether, given the huge amount of money that we're talking about here, and given the fact that, as far as I know, none of us are on the ESD board, and so we're not present in that conversation. I think it would be advisable to review that policy and consider whether we would want to review the report before it's provided to the parent corporation.
Governance 101 is we cannot give away our oversight, our fiduciary of oversight, to a smaller subset, whereas this might not be the example. I do agree with you. I mean, they still have the right to do it, but maybe we should be exhibiting a belt and suspenders approach where we're also looking at it as well, in addition to them.
We're more likely to be able to have meaningful questions and comments, and we're also more likely to be able to refine the quality of the report.
But remember
at the
this,
parent
it would not be the full ESD financial statements that would be presented to.
Oh, no, of course not. We would only want the
It would be a subset, but it would have to be after the entire report is reviewed and presented to the parent organization.
Well, let me put it, so David, you have two requests on the table, perfectly fine, so we will do, we'll do the first one, which is to show you what the actual expenditures were for the prior year. And I hear you're, at a minimum, at the moment, you're looking for what information exists, and then the question then is how and when should that be presented to the board and in what form. So let us, as a second item right now, get you the information that exists on CCDC, and then we can figure out how to move forward.
I don't completely agree with you.
An interesting question related to that is the outside auditors do a specific opinion letter with regard to the DC board, or is it the wrapped up?
It's the wrap.
There's for no ESD subsidiaries.
I really have a problem with that. I'd like to take a look, and maybe counsel at this. I think that we should insist on a rep letter to us. And otherwise, what are we doing here?
He has a very good point.
Well,
I'm not trying to get involved in process here. Where I'm coming from is we all have fiduciary responsibilities here. They're duties. I can show you any governance booklet where those duties are significant, and we can't just waive them. I'm not asking to interrupt process. If we could see the numbers and look at them, so we're comfortable that we're fulfilling our fiduciary duties, because a lot of us are attorneys, a lot of us are people of means. I don't even know if we have D&O insurance here, but I don't want to ever be accused of circumventing certain responsibilities. We're all selected to sit on the board in a sense of oversight. I'm not looking to make life difficult for you, but if we've been tasked with oversight, then we actually have to practice some oversight. So to the extent that we can practically accommodate David, I think he has a very good point.
Would have one correction where you said a rep letter. We, thank goodness, don't ever want to get a rep letter, right? Because those are findings. We have an opinion from our auditors that give a...
You're speaking about two different things. What he's saying is if you don't want to give it, have the attorney say that you have fulfilled your obligations, your duties, and you don't have to go any further.
Oh, no, we have a full CCDC financial statement that we can share that has the auditor's opinion in the front, an unmodified opinion. But again, Robin asked, let's give us some time to talk to them, to find out when in the process this should be done, and we can talk to counsel and various folks and just weigh in.
And we're not looking to,
not
I don't think we're looking to interrupt the process. Just, in the process of your approvals, if it can be put in front of us so we can review it before it goes up to the parent company, it's an extra set of eyes.
Again, it's the when that we'll discuss.
Thank you, Judge, I appreciate that.
Do have to.
Yes.
The rep letter they're referring to is the letter that we give to the auditors where we make representations that they rely upon to issue their audit.
Right, and we have that. Robin signs that, our CFO signs that.
I'm sure they do.
And Howard Zemsky signs that. So we have a rep letter that starts, that obviously, they don't release the reports
No.
until they receive those letters.
Okay, any comments
Just so that
on
it goes on the record, I just want to, again, I know Jolene said it unofficially, and I nodded. You do have directors and officers liability insurance, so that goes into the public record.
It's always good to know.
Are there any Q&A from the public? Or not any Q from the public? Okay, if not, let's have a motion for approval of what Robin presented. So move, second.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, the motion carries. The next item is Robin providing his president's report. I will note for the record that this item is being presented for our information only, and no vote will be required. Robin?
Thank you, Henry. At the last meeting, David Thurm appeared, and we indicated to you that at the last meeting, not at this meeting, at the last meeting, David Thurm appeared, gave us a construction update. We indicated at that time that David is leaving his position as the project director, as the head of the CCDC project management team, and we were looking to a smooth transition. We have had many conversations, in fact, with some of you, references, conversations with Gus, conversations with the governor's office. We believe we have found Gus Mamus, who is also a Lair Cumming employee, just like Durham was. Peter was also someone who has participated in this process. Gus has begun to get his feet wet. We believe that he will be a worthy successor to David. The way that we had planned this is that Gus would be here to introduce himself and to take you through the construction update. I'm sorry to report that Gus's father passed away over the weekend. Not unexpected, but needless to say, Gus is attending to his family, as he should be. So he will be, he is certainly expected to be at the next meeting. Just to be clear, CCDC has not signed any formal transition papers yet. We are still sure we're satisfied with references and Gus's qualifications and his ability to be successor. We're not in issues, but we just haven't formally signed it. But I want you to I should expect that he would be at the next directors meeting to introduce himself and to lead us through construction update. But I'm happy to take any questions on that you would like.
I do have a question, and I'm not sure if this is due to the nature of the question, this has to be done in a public context, but can we discuss his compensation, just so that as, are we entering into a contract to pay the rate of market? And,
yeah, no, more fair question. The short answer to the question is we believe the longer answer to your question is it's somewhat below David Thurm. I think David had certain expertise, and Gus brings, I think, the same kind of expertise period of time, although I think Gus is at 30 years already. There, and it's without going into details, although it would be part of a public record when we do conclude a formal agreement on the successorship. Gus's salary is about 15% or so less than David Thurm's.
Right, is that of the
It
budget?
It comes out of the under the project management clause. Of course, remember the project management team is a very large team. The team, the largest part of the project management budget that we pay every month is not the directorship position by any means, but the directorship position is part of that.
Yeah, my point is it's not part of the CCDC budget and that we're not paying him directly. We CCDC.
Well, that's right. We pay a project management team, and then that gets dispersed by the project management team, correct?
Yeah.
I have one other related question. So I understand he's coming from the outside, so there are no other, it's not as though he's moving up and somebody is replacing him.
Yeah, that's correct, yes. He's coming from outside the current project management team, that is correct.
Right. So I think I was wondering if this would, given that we're having a new head, and look, just like if we're honest about ourselves, looking at, can we get a report to the board on on women representation in the construction team? Because obviously it's disappointing that we.
Well, there's the construction team or the management team.
In the team that David Thurm was running, and in this team that he's coming to, I think we have that there be some type. And I'd like to,
MWB.
A diversity requirement.
and I'd like to know how, just given the fact that unfortunately. At least it looks. To look at this and ask how they're
David,
doing
just to be
with
clear, this may be a moment, but we have many such moments. There are clear, both for Lindley's Turner as the expansion constructor, Tishman as the builder of the transformer building, and for a project management team. Those folks have M and W, minority and women diversity requirements. Jolene Handler, who's in the room, those on each of those contracts monthly. So it's not just a question of Gus replacing David.
So how are we hitting our 30% target and our 6% for disabled veterans?
It depends on which contract, and some of them are still in procurement, so to speak. So they're projecting to hit, but it's not a definitive yes. We're hitting all of our targets. So we need, and there are change orders that happen and things like that. So it's not a definitive answer to your question.
Let me ask you a more generalized question.
Yeah.
I chair a public safety net hospital. 36% of what we buy is pharmaceuticals. I have to buy an MRI machine at Siemens or GE.
Right.
Very difficult for me to hit that. I happen to chair Battery Park City Authority. We were 46% last month, all prime contracts. A little easier. So I guess my general question is, we're cognizant, it's a priority, and we're putting a lot of effort into getting there, which is, to me, as important.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We're putting, I would say we've actually brought in, and maybe we can have her come back, Tracy Mitchell, who managed the Tappan Zee Bridge reconstruction project to help us manage the diversity compliance on this project. And it's really been extraordinarily helpful to meetings, and aggressive and important.
I appreciate all your effort, and let me compliment you. I just might add one thing to our agenda. If after your report, we can just do at least a quarterly. I think the regs call for a quarterly report. Report
To the board.
to the board.
I think that would be great. I don't know, it really would be.
I don't, well, obviously whatever legal requirements there are, we will fulfill.
Yeah.
I would say to you that yes, there are quarterly reports. And I do just want to reiterate something that Jillian said, which is we have the person who did the diversity requirements for the Tappan Zee Bridge. Her name is Tracy Mitchell. I believe she appeared in front of you maybe 3 meetings ago. Happy to have her come back. But whatever material is available, of course, will be made available to the directors. Yes.
Right. And regardless of, I don't think it should be looked at from a legal requirement point of view. The directors can request what what we feel is appropriate.
Okay.
And I think that, I think a quarterly report is wise. And I'd like to say one of the reasons for this is, exactly as George is saying, it's one thing to talk about procurement by our contractors, and I think it's very important that we satisfy those procurement requirements. But it's another thing just to ensure that our contractors themselves are fulfilling the obligation. And I happen to know from experience, I'm sure George will agree with this, that there are a number of very, very qualified women in construction activities at the Port Authority. Clearly there also, but you have to, I'd like to ensure that our contractors, Turner, whomever, are themselves in their staffing meeting these requirements.
That is a priority of ours, yes.
And we do require staffing reporting.
I think George is correct. If we could get a quarterly report to the board that explains that to us, so we can see where we're hitting our targets, where we're missing them, and where we're doing better, I think that would be very valuable.
Okay. And with that, I would move on to the construction update. Again, we were supposed to have pretty pictures up on the wall for you, but since we have a screen and we're live streaming on that one, we have pictures in front of you. And I would be happy to take you through those pictures as part of my construction update. It will look somewhat familiar to you from the last time that we met. What I say to people is that we're in the golden age of the Javits expansion. And by that I mean beginning last September through to this coming September of 2019, you will see the entire structure of what we're building come together. We started basically from grade last September with the steel erection, and by September of this coming year, of this current year, 2019, the entire steel structure for the expo hall will be built out. What we call the spine, which I'll describe to you in a minute, will be built out, and the margin will be topped out. So if you're driving by the West Side Highway, keep your eyes open for visual progress. Remember, the visual progress is traveling from the west to the east. So as it expands to its full height at the west, towards the west side, you might not see as much because you can't see further east. But I can assure you that it is being done and will be done in this year. So let's see. Henry, may I use your sheet?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think I described before that the Lindley's-Turner construction consists of, remember, it consists of an expo hall, which is all steel, and thank you, Dave, consists of the expo hall, which is all steel, and the truck marshaling garage, which is all concrete. So let's take the truck marshaling garage first, because that's furthest to the north. As you can see, this first picture in front of you is taken basically from the river, looking back east. And so what you have to the left here is the concrete structure of the truck marshaling garage rising. It is only a 4-story building. As you see, the first 2 floors to the west are poured and getting ready already for floor number 3. It's not as developed further to the east, but it will be shortly. We have large pours of 100 or so trucks almost once a week. We do that in the middle of the night so as to not disrupt traffic. And so far we've had minimal complaint from the neighbors about any of that noise. I think that but that's been going great. So we're up to framing out the 3rd floor already to the west, and that process will continue, as I say, for the next 6 months and be completed August or September. For the steel structure, it really has 2 separate pieces, what we call the spine, which is coming down the middle of what used to be 39th Street, and then the actual expo hall where the extra 100,000 square feet of exposition space will be, with meeting rooms on top, with the ballroom on top of that. So talking about the spine first, the spine is topped out all the way to the middle of the site. And in fact, the steel erection for the spine has come all the way east already to the end of our property, out towards 11th Avenue. So what will be continuing over the next couple of months in terms of the spine. Maybe the second picture shows you a bit more about the spine. We need to tilt our cameras further up because, in fact, the construction is on above the angle of the camera for the moment. But what you see basically in the background with the steel, the rusted steel there, is the fact that the spine extends and although off this picture, the first floor of the steel erection has already taken place all the way to the eastern edge of our site. So that's coming along very well. And then the third picture, again, a little harder to grasp, but what you'll see is on the right-hand side of that third picture is, again, the spine with the decking going in place as well, falling behind the actual steel erection. But look to the, I'm sorry if I said this, but if you look at the background, are starting to rise. We have 3 or 4 trusses already up, approximately 12 altogether. The board that there was some issue with bringing the trusses whole across the George Washington Bridge. They're being fabricated across the river. We've had a back and forth with both the Port Authority on the bridge and City DOT about transporting down the streets. In the past 2 weeks, I think, we actually managed to get 1 full truss across the bridge and down the streets of the site. There were some, nothing was injured, nothing was damaged, but there were some further questions about bringing a whole truss across the bridge and down the street. So we're addressing those and hope to be able to continue to bring whole trusses. Because what's happened for the first 2 or 3 trusses that were delivered, we had to cut them and then weld them back to the full 130-foot length on site, and that it's a little time consuming. We will make up for that with weekend work, but if we can bring those trusses across, that will obviously be better. So I'm happy to report that the steel erection and the concrete pours are on schedule. In fact, the concrete pours are probably somewhat ahead of schedule. They do not represent the critical path because we had always expected that the steel erection was going to take longer than the concrete. But as I say, both of those should be, both the totality of the steel erection and the totality of the concrete pours should be done by approximately September of 2019, this year. Maybe I gave my picture way too soon. Remember, right back to the first picture, you have the transformer building, the separate $100 million project being put together by Tishman Construction, which is the battery, the electrical battery. Both will serve existing Javits. I said when we discussed the budget, that third or so. We are coordinating, and I'm going to talk more about it with the last action item that I have today. Obviously, we're coordinating with OC, we're coordinating with DASNY, our permitting authority, and importantly, of course, we're coordinating with Con Ed to make sure that the building is ready to be energized so that it can power existing Javits as of this summer, and then we'll be ready to power the expansion once the expansion is done. So I think in the middle of that I probably gave a schedule update, but just to be clear, in terms of the transformer, we expect to energize by this summer of 2019. At that point, I think I've described that the existing switchgear, which is actually at the bottom of that building, will then be demolished and replaced with emergency generator capacity. And that extra piece of the project is expected to take another 6 to 9 months into 2020. But at that point, then, Javits for the first time will have emergency generation capacity, which it does not have today. And in terms of the expansion, again, both the structures will be finished by this fall. We're roughly halfway through the 42-month schedule, and right on schedule for the moment, and still on target for the contractually required March of 2021 completion date. In terms of the budget, the directors have seen the sources and uses many times at this point. I'm fond of saying for better or for worse. I have a set budget, and I'm spending against the contracts that I have for the uses that you've already seen. Obviously, the biggest two being the construction of the expansion and the construction of the transformer. We have the interest that is from money that we've had in our accounts, but basically the sources and the uses have remained the same for the past 2 years, and will remain the same through the conclusion of this project. So I'm happy to report, again, to be clear, that we are on budget and on schedule, and I am pushing to make sure that remains true.
Well, as all of us who build stuff for a living know, it's the fit and finish where you run into cost issues. We're not quite there yet, so
we're not.
We will. Robin will now present our last item, which is a request for authorization for the corporation to amend its construction manager at-risk services contract with Tishman Construction Company.
I will do that, but I guess I should have concluded my president's report by reiterating what I've said also many times, which is that if any director would like a site tour, more than happy to accommodate you. The weather's getting warmer. There's a tremendous amount of visual progress to be seen, not just any pictures, but to walk in the site. So if any of you would like to walk the site, please let me know. Be happy to arrange that. This last item is in connection with the transformer building. As the directors have previously authorized, CCDC has an existing contract with Tishman Construction, pursuant to which Tishman acts as CCDC's construction manager at risk, or CMAR as we call it, for the transformer building. That contract has a guaranteed maximum price, or GMP, of just over $93.5 million. And I guess a year ago, the directors also authorized CCDC, or owner contingency, for an additional $3 million. So with the GMP of 93.5 and the owner contingency of up to 3, the current maximum on that contract is $96.5 million. As I say, the transformer building has been progressing very well. I can give you as much detail about that as you think you need, including all the coordination with DASNY and with ED. It is important to note, although we're not meeting with at Javits for a CCOC meeting, but I think I've said many times that CCDC coordinates very closely with CCOC on all aspects of the Javits expansion, including the transformer building, and including the energization, excuse me, of existing Javits, which will happen, as I say, this summer. So Allen Steel has already begun to be all over the transformer building. They are working closely with the CMAR, Tishman Construction as CMAR. They are working closely with CMAR's primary sub-consultant, EJ Electrical, and Tony is here from OC, but I want to assure you that we're working hand in glove to make sure that when the building, even before the building is energized and before it powers existing Javits, obviously the OC staff will be ready to take on oversight of that. So we're hard at work on that already. So as I say, construction of the transformer work remains within the schedule already set forth in the contract, which the directors have authorized. And it's, again, I said this once, I'll want to say it again and emphasize it, that the overall transformer project budget previously discussed is we're also within that budget. We have a blanket $100 million budget for both the construction and the consultants, and we are currently within that budget. And even with the authorization that I am seeking, we will remain within that budget. But nonetheless, as people have alluded to, things get complicated on the site, the cost and certain intricacies, and particularly because I know that the construction happens all over Manhattan and all over New York City, all over the world, sort of cheek by jowl. Two sites can be constructing at the same time, and they have to be cognizant of what's next door. I to you that this site is a little bit on two independent, and it's not really what we're doing here. We have to both coordinate with existing jabs to make sure that there were absolutely zero interruptions existing, and at the same time we have to coordinate with Lindley's Turner next door to make sure that the much larger project, the $1.2 billion project, also doesn't get delayed. So it is complicated. It has resulted in certain coordination issues, and so as is typical of these kinds of projects where you're really integrating several different facilities, in order to protect themselves, just to be clear, CCDC has received from CMAR and from LLT certain cost claims and certain delay claims in connection with coordination of the joint project. We work through those on a regular basis. We dispute what we think should not be. Obviously, the first thing we do is try to coordinate so that we avoid any of these issues. The second thing we do when confronted with a claim is undertake a very thorough analysis to ascertain whether or not we think it's a valid claim, whether or not we think that owner is actually responsible, and of course what the cost of that might be, because we do our own independent cost estimating. So all of those things continue on a regular basis. We are still on the expansion side, still on the early side of change orders. On the transformer side, we're hopefully actually a little towards the later side of the change orders, because as I say, we're 2/3 of the way through the project. But to address these concerns at the CMAR site in advance, and to make sure that we're keeping the transformer work and the Lindley's Turner expansion work on schedules, the directors today are being asked to authorize an increase in the CCDC or owner contingency for the expansion building, for the transformer building only, from the current $3 million to $5 million to cover possible additional costs. This would increase the owner's contingency to approximately 5.35% of GMP, well within, and even lower than, general industry standards, and would bring the potential expenditures under the CMAR contract to a not-to-exceed amount of 98.5, as distinct from the current authorization of 96.5. It's also worth noting, at least briefly, that pursuant to the CMAR contract, the GMP includes a CMAR contingency of about $4 million. To the extent that that CMAR contingency is not used, CCDC will recoup 50 cents on every unspent dollar. So even if we expend 98.5, there is some possibility that we would recoup some of the funds to keep the overall budget under 98.5. But again, as I say, so we'll be watching that. And again, I say this is all well within the questions, but otherwise I would ask for the directors to authorize this increase.
If no question for the motion, please. Second. In favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, Robin, that concludes our business today.
It does. The only thing I would say is where I started, which is we'll attempt to coordinate with OSHI as much as possible into the future.
So we need a motion to please.
Thank you. Well, remember what we did is we had scheduled a monthly meeting. So there is, I believe there was one scheduled later in